It's such a treat to be here today, not the least of which because I got to have my son introduce me, and because it's for my son's school, Swickley Academy, so that's an extra treat. But what's most fun for me about being here today is actually talking about resilience, and this is why. Now, as my son mentioned, I am indeed a writer on a mission, and I've learned that that's a little unusual. I definitely have a focus and a goal. My goal is to excavate from the past these crucial women of history, shine a light on them, and bring their stories to the forefront so we can really understand their lives and their legacies and the way in which those legacies reverberate around us all today in ways that very often we are completely unaware. However, when I set out on this mission, I actually did not realize that I was also writing about resilience. So when Anjali asked me if I would like to do this speech, it was kind of a full circle moment. Now, what do I mean by that, right? What do I mean that this whole time I've been writing about resilience? Well, if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'm going to talk about a few of the women I've written about. Not all of them, because I don't actually have 45 minutes. I think Anjali gave me 7 or 8. But I'm going to talk a little bit about these women so you can see what I mean. Mileva Marish. Mileva was born in the backwater of 19th century Serbia, where it was actually illegal for girls to go to high school. You could be jailed for the attempt to get a higher education. However, unlike almost anybody else in her background, Mileva managed to become one of the very first women in all of Europe at a university physics program. While she was there, undertaking her course of studies, she had a lab partner by the name of Albert Einstein. These two worked together for 4 years on a variety of projects, and after their studies came to a close, they married. Together, they embarked on creating a series of theories that formed the foundation for modern physics. Theories that were so profound in a period that was so prolific, it's referred to as the miracle year. And very specifically, she had a very large hand, I think, in the theory of special relativity. Next up is Hetty Kiesler. Raised in a Jewish enclave in pre-World War II Vienna, Hetty actually married a prominent arms dealer. And as the years progressed, he became the primary arms dealer, first to Mussolini and then to Hitler. On her husband's arm, Hetty became privy to most of the military secrets of World War II. And she became privy to the plans for the Jewish people. Hetty obviously had to make plans to escape, and she did that. She escaped both these ultimate plans and her abusive husband, and made her way to America, where, landing in Hollywood, she eventually became known as the golden age of Hollywood actress Hedy Lamarr. Now, Hetty didn't leave her ambitions behind, but they shifted. And she decided that she wanted to strike out against the Nazis and the Axis powers, who she'd spent so much unfortunate time with. She was a self-taught scientist, and in her spare time, on movie sets and in her home, she created a device called the Secret Communication System. Her plan was that this device would be utilized in torpedo warfare to make the Allies more effective at sea. At this time, torpedo warfare was horrifically inefficient. She offered it to the Navy, but they declined because perhaps you don't know this, but during this time period, a woman couldn't be both brilliant and beautiful. These two things didn't go together. Hetty thought that this was behind her, but the reality is her device, over the decades that followed, became Wi-Fi. That you're probably using right now. The third woman on my list is Clementine Hosier. Now, on paper, if you were to read about or see images of Clementine, you would think she was the quintessential British aristocrat. In reality, Clementine's world was chaotic at best. They were always short of funds. Her family constantly had to move to escape creditors. And she was a bright, bright woman who had limited access to schooling because of the peripatetic nature of her family's life. When Clementine finally married a man you might know, his name was Winston Churchill, she embarked on a career that was actually very dear to her. She had always had a secret passion for politics, which was something not encouraged in girls at that time, and certainly not within Clementine's means growing up. She, behind the scenes, both behind, to the side, and in front of her husband, Winston, she became integral to his politics and to his political world. And from the years World War I all the way through to World War II, she was at his side. Clementine was not just the stereotypical politician's wife, and in fact, she was so crucial to all that he did that at the end of World War II, Winston's chief of staff, General Pug Ismay, was quoted as saying, "Without Clementine Churchill, the history of the world would have been a very different story." Rosalind Franklin. This brilliant British chemist persevered to secure a research position at a top university in the 1950s, despite the fact that there were very, very few women in the field and in these sorts of roles. Through her hard work and her perseverance, she labored to create the very first few images, now famous images, of the structure of DNA. These images were taken and utilized without her knowledge or permission by two men you may have heard of, Francis Crick and James Watson. Now, these two men are in every textbook. They won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the structure of DNA. But they did so utilizing Rosalind's research. Not to be deterred, Rosalind continued with her research in the years that followed and made enormous strides in the understanding of the structure and purpose of RNA. Rosalind's work laid the foundation for our understanding of COVID and the creation of the COVID vaccines. Belle DeCosta Green. Belle DeCosta Green was a brilliant librarian, an astute art historian, and she was hired by someone you may know, the famous industrialist and financier, J.P. Morgan. She was hired to curate, collect, and maintain his world-class collection of rare and priceless books and manuscripts. He, in fact, built an entire library in Manhattan to store these, and it was her job to help run it. She became all this and more, and in fact, in the years that followed, she became one of the most powerful people in the art world. And she really revolutionized the libraries as we know them. So many of the programs that she instituted are commonly used today. However, Belle would never have been able to assume this role had her true identity been known. Belle was a Black woman, passing as white during an era of segregation and Jim Crow laws. She very likely would have not even been allowed in the institution that she ran. Despite all this, and assuming this identity, she actually ran one of the world's most preeminent cultural institutions, the Morgan Library, for decades in the years that followed. Each of these women, and many, many more, some of which I've written about, some of which are just on a list for potential book topics, overcame seemingly insurmountable barriers to thrive in the passions that drove them. The societal pressures against them was great, and sometimes they faced overt condemnation and consternation. And as I was learning about these women, and I spent a lot of time in the rabbit hole of research as I pieced together their stories, it seemed to me that these women and their lives are the very definition of resilience. And the more I learned about them, the more in awe I was at that resilience. All that they managed managed to endure and rise above. But I also learned something else, something unexpected, something I certainly had not planned to uncover. And that is that I believe that there was one thing in common across all of these women that led to this resilience, that led to the power of them pushing through these barriers. These women came from wildly different backgrounds, hugely different socioeconomic backgrounds. They had different personalities, different passions, they lived in different eras, and yet one thing remained the same. What was it? For each of these women, they had at least one person who believed in them. Someone who encouraged them, supported them, bolstered them, lifted up their interests and ambitions, despite the odds being stacked against them. That person was the key, I came to believe, to their resilience. Who was that for each of these women? For Maleva Marish Einstein, it was her father. He was a civil servant who saw in Maleva a seed of mathematical and scientific genius from a very young age, and he fostered it, despite the risks to himself, despite the fact that he had to get multiple governmental dispensations for her to attend ever more increasing schooling. For Hetty Kiesler Lamar, it was also her father. Her father was not a scientist, but he was a bright businessman who would spend his Sundays on long walks throughout Viennese parks with his daughter. They would talk about the way the world worked, how objects were engineered, and it sparked in her this desire to learn how things were made. What about Clementine Churchill? She and the next one on my list, Rosalind Franklin, weren't necessarily supported by their families. They came from very different backgrounds, but by a teacher. Each one of them had one teacher early on that saw in them a passion and fostered it, sparked it along. With Rosalind, it was obviously math and science, but with Clementine, she had a school teacher who saw in her a love for politics. Belle de Costa Green, we believe, had two sparks, if you will, two people who helped foster her resilience, and those were her parents. Belle's father, Richard T. Greener, a man whose identity she had to hide in order to maintain her role as a white woman in a segregated society. He was the first Black graduate of Harvard, and during his lifetime was a renowned advocate for equality. Her mother came from a similarly well-educated, multi-generational free community of color in Washington, D.C. Taken together, these two gave her the necessary strength to persevere against unbelievable odds. And for myself, I certainly don't put myself in the same category as these incredible women I read about, but I too had somebody who spurred me along, who really fostered in me the resilience to do something different. And that was my aunt. My aunt, Terry, was an English professor. She was a poet. She's not with us anymore, but I know she'd be okay with me describing her as a rebellious nun. And I was a voracious reader growing up, and she was the one who really kept me in books. And I think it was a birthday when I was much, much younger, she gifted me a book that literally put me on the path that I'm on today, and that book was called The Mists of Avalon. It was, most of you have probably never heard of it today, but it was a female-centric retelling of the Arthurian legends. So instead of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, we had Arthur's wife, Morgan Le Fay, and his sister, Morgan Le Fay, and his wife, Queen Guinevere. Same story as the one I had been told, but told through the lens of the women, a completely different narrative. And it opened my eyes to the hidden stories, especially the voices of women lurking in history. And it ignited in me a passion to find them. And I often wonder, without my aunt feeding me books and once she saw a little flame really fanning it into being, what would I be doing today? Would I still be a New York City lawyer? I hope not. I certainly probably wouldn't be standing on the stage before you today, or having had the delight and honor to write about these women. And I wonder, what about all the women I told you about today? Where would they be without that one person to help them along? Taken from this perspective, I believe that it is incumbent upon all of us to support and bolster and encourage those around us. Because I believe while resilience does come from within, it also comes from without. Without that external support and encouragement, whatever little spark of resilience resides in us cannot come to its fullest potential. I believe that resilience is necessary for all of us.